Good morning, students. Today we are going to deal with a very important clinical topic, that is diabetic retinopathy. As you are aware, diabetic retinopathy is not only important from your exam point of view, but it will be a very important topic from clinical point of view, as we get a lot of cases of diabetic retinopathy in our day-to-day clinical practice. As you are aware, diabetes is on the increase. Numbers are increasing day by day, and it is said that India will be a capital of diabetes in few years. Because of the changed lifestyle, sedentary work, faulty diet, and uh, stress factor, diabetes is on the rise. And also, Asians are genetically uh, predilected for diabetes. All these factors are contributing to the increase in diabetes, and because of that, diabetic retinopathy. In introduction, let us discuss about diabetes first. Diabetes is a chronic metabolic disease characterized by elevated levels of blood glucose. It is a heterogeneous group of metabolic disorders that share the phenotype of hyperglycemia. So it is basically characterized by elevated blood sugar levels. Diabetes is of two types. Type 1, which previously was called as insulin dependent, it is characterized by autoimmune disease where the insulin is not secreted. There are autoantibodies against the beta cells of Langerhans. So there is absolute no secretion of insulin in this, and patient lifelong depends on the external insulin for its treatment. Whereas type 2 is non-insulin type of diabetes where there is a various degree of insulin resistance by the cells, and which leads to the increased blood sugar levels and slight contribution of impaired secretion, and because of that there is increased glucose in the blood. So more important is insulin resistance in type 2. So it is not that insulin is not at all secreted, so they don't require insulin in the initial period of treatment. Oral hypoglycemics are enough to check the sugar levels, but later on they may turn insulin dependent. Disease is polygenic and multifactorial, genetic susceptibility as well as environmental factors like obesity, lack of physical activity, etc. The basic pathophysiology of the disease is characterized by generalized macro and microvascular complications. So, diabetes affects both macro and microvascular structures of the body. Microvascular complications are due to microangiopathy. They are directly linked to glycemic control, and they affect kidneys, eyes, and peripheral nerves. Whereas macrovascular complications are affecting the heart and brain. So in short, these are the target organs. Because it is a micro and microangiopathy, micro and macro vessels, wherever in the body, they are affected simultaneously along with retina. In microvascular, kidney, eye, and peripheral nerves, they have similar microvascular blood supply. Kidneys have glomerular apparatus which resembles eyes, and retina has microvessels of the level of arterioles and venules, and peripheral nerves are supplied by vasa vasorum nervosa. They also are similar to the blood supply of kidneys and eyes. So when they are affected, it is known as microangiopathy. So you know diabetics are prone for kidney failure, diabetics have retinopathy problem, and because of peripheral neuropathy, they suffer from the peripheral ulcers. Whereas microvascular complications affect heart, diabetics are prone for myocardial infarction, brain, diabetics are prone for stroke, and again limbs are affected because of microvascular complications. So these tissues are known as target organs, and diabetes is known to affect the target organs equally. So the clinical importance of this is when you see retinopathy changes, you suspect similar changes taking place in kidney or peripheral nerves. So retinopathy can be of help not only from saving the vision of the patient, but you can also anticipate the collateral damage in the kidneys simultaneously. Now this is a diagram showing the genetic contribution in diabetes plus environmental complication and leading to the damage to the target organs like retinopathy, nephropathy, neuropathy, and coronary artery disease, peripheral artery disease, and stroke. Now you have to know the capillaries. Retinal capillaries supply inner two-thirds of the retina and outer third is being supplied by the choriocapillaries. Now inner capillary network is located in the ganglion cell layer with an outer plexus in the inner nuclear layer. Capillary free zone is present around the arterioles and at the fovea. You know already we have studied this. And retinal capillaries are devoid of smooth muscle and elastic tissue. So these are the characteristics of the retinal blood supply. Now retinal arteriole wall consists of endothelial cells which form a single layer on the basement membrane and they are linked by tight junctions that form the inner blood retinal barrier. So normally there are tight junctions lining the endothelial cells and they act as barrier. So normally no leakage occurs through the blood capillaries of the retina. And the basement membrane lies beneath the endothelial cells with an outer basal lamina enclosing pericytes. So in the basement membrane there are cells which are known as pericytes. They are named after Ashton. They are known as Ashton's pericytes which form the basement membrane of the endothelial lining of the capillaries. Pericytes lie external to the endothelial cells and have multiple pseudopodial processes that envelop the capillaries. Pericytes have contractile properties and are thought to participate in autoregulation of the microvascular circulation. So in routine physiological structure, physiological arrangement, if you see the endothelial cells, basement membrane and pericytes, they very effectively form the inner blood retinal barrier. Why this knowledge is important? Because when we will learn the pathophysiology of diabetic retinopathy, we will see that there is a damage at the level of basement membrane and pericytes which lead to all the complications of diabetic retinopathy. Now we talk about prevalence. Reported prevalence of diabetic retinopathy in diabetics is around 40%. More common in type 1 than type 2 retinopathy. It is a sight-threatening disease. It presents a sight-threatening disease up to 10% of people. Proliferative diabetic retinopathy affects 5 to 10% of the diabetic population. Type 1 diabetics are more at risk for PDR changes, where incidence is up to 90% after 30 years. The epidemiology risk factor. Duration of diabetes is most important risk factor. So age of diabetic is very important. More the years patient is having diabetes, more are the chances of getting diabetic retinopathy. Poor control of diabetes, raised glycosylated hemoglobin is associated with increased risk of proliferative diabetic retinopathy. So control is equally important. Pregnancy with diabetes is a very bad prognosis for diabetic retinopathy. Again, comorbidity, hypertensive disease, if it is associated with type 2 diabetes, then it has a bad prognosis as far as retinopathy is concerned. Control of hypertension is equally important. Nephropathy, if severe, is associated with worsening of DR. So you come across patients where there is a retinopathy plus nephropathy. They are termed as Kimmel-Still-Wilson syndrome. So the prognosis for these particular patients is generally very bad. Other risk factors include hyperlipidemia, smoking, cataract surgery, obesity, and anemia. So these are the epidemiological factors which contribute to the diabetic retinopathy. Now pathogenesis, as we have seen, the capillary lining of lined by pericytes, basement membrane, and their role in blood vascular barrier, blood retinal barrier. So in diabetes, what happens is hyperglycemia or stage of hyperglycemia by very complex biochemical changes leads to loss of intramural pericytes, which we discussed as Ashton cells. So the pericytes lining the capillaries in the retina, there is loss of intramural pericytes by hyperglycemia. Then there occurs thickening of basement membrane and also progressive closure of retinal capillaries. Whole pathophysiology of diabetic retinopathy changes will be understood if you understand these three changes occurring at the level of capillaries. I will repeat them. There is loss of intramural pericytes, there is thickening of basement membrane, and there is progressive closure of retinal capillaries. Now, what they lead to internally? What? The initial loss of pericytes leads to formation of dilatations of the vessels. So, the vessel wall shows outpouchings, dilatation and outpouching by the vessel wall, which is known as microaneurysm. So, initial change in diabetic retinopathy is microaneurysms. Then there occurs breakdown of blood retinal barrier. So there starts leakage of vascular contents into the surrounding tissue. So aneurysm, microaneurysm and leakage by the capillaries. Because of leakage, there occurs, because of leakage, the fluid soaked retina becomes edematous. So there occurs edema, and if the leakage contains lipids, lot of lipids they get leaked out from the capillaries. These lipids get engulfed by macrophages and then they form hard exudates. So these hard exudates, you have to know the term, they are lipid exudates. They are tiny yellow deposits seen in the retina in case of diabetes and other diseases. They are because of the lipoprotein exudates which are engulfed by macrophages. Then third change occurs is deep hemorrhages. So blood also leaks out from the capillaries, and the blood which is leaked out in diabetes is get localized deep in the retina in the plexiform layer, and it assumes a shape of dot and blot. There are two types of hemorrhages. One is flame shaped or other is dot and blot. So diabetes is characterized by dot and blot hemorrhages. So these are the changes which are directly because of the weak capillary wall or changes occurring in the capillary wall. In addition, there occurs aggregation of platelets. There occur hemodynamic changes which lead to increased aggregation of platelets. They cause capillary non-perfusion. So there occurs capillary occlusion, and because of that non-perfusion, and because of non-perfusion, there is extensive closure of capillaries which leads to ischemia of the retina. Now, to all these changes, body attempts to re-establish blood supply. So ultimately there occurs ischemia. So counter this, there occurs natural response from the body. How? There occurs opening up of shunt vessels, which are known as intraretinal microvascular abnormalities or IRMA. So to counter the ischemic process, the shunt vessels get opened up, and they are known as intraretinal microvascular abnormalities. Or there occurs elaborative vasoproliferative substance release. Ischemic retina releases vasoproliferative substance. This is known as vascular endothelial growth factor or VEGF. Now, release of VEGF is a desperate attempt by the nature to form the new vessels. So this release of VEGF leads to neovascularization. Where these new vessels are located? They are located at the border between poorly perfused and well perfused retinal areas. So at the junction of these two, there occurs new vessel formation. So you should ask the question, if this attempt is made by the nature, why the retina goes on deteriorating. Because even though the neovascularization has taken place, this neovascular tissue is more friable. It is not as healthy as natural original vessels. The attempted neovascularization is friable, it bleeds easily, and it incites a fibroblastic response. So these new vessels, they bleed very easily, there occurs recurrent bleeding, and along with the bleeding there occurs fibroblastic response leading to fibrovascular proliferation. Now this fibrovascular proliferation takes place in the vitreous. So recurrent vitreous hemorrhages leading to fibrovascular proliferation ultimately leads to tractional type of retinal detachment. Now this tractional detachment is a cause of blindness in diabetic retinopathy. Now this neovascularization of the retina, if the process is not halted, intervened in time, will ultimately lead to neovascularization of the iris. This is known as NVI or Uveitis iridis, and this encroaches on the angle, and this leads to neovascular glaucoma. So these are the terminal events of diabetic retinopathy. So you can now imagine how the diabetic patients lead to blindness if the intervention is not done in time. So if you are asked what are the blinding complications of diabetic retinopathy, the blinding complications include vitreous hemorrhage, recurrent vitreous hemorrhage, fractional retinal detachment, and neovascular glaucoma. So these are blinding complications. In addition to that, you must remember that diabetic patients suffer from mild to moderate vision loss. This mild to moderate vision loss is because of the macular edema. Characteristic macular edema, which is developed in diabetes, is known as CSME, clinically significant macular edema. So there are now two concepts. One is blinding complication, where patient terminally goes blind. They are because of neovascular glaucoma, fractional detachment, vitreous hemorrhage. And other entity is morbidity of the vision or mild to moderate vision loss. Cause of mild to moderate vision loss is macular edema. As you know, macula is involved with central vision. Edema of the macula leads to diminution of vision, not to direct blindness. But this mild to moderate vision loss because of macular edema involves much of the population and is a very important cause of diminution of vision, not blindness, diminution of vision in working population, and this causes lot of ocular morbidity. So you must understand diabetic macular edema also, which will be covered subsequently. Here I will like to uh, pose two questions for you. One is hypothesis for biochemical changes involved in hyperglycemia induce microvascular damage. We have seen microvascular damage in the form of thickening of basement membrane, loss of transmural pericytes, and capillary closure and microaneurysm. Now, what are the four hypotheses involved in biochemical changes of hyperglycemia induced microvascular damage? I expect much detailed answer from the post-grad students here. And second question is, write in detail about pathophysiology of diabetic retinopathy. So diabetic retinopathy, pathophysiology. And third question is epidemiological factors in diabetic retinopathy. So at this juncture, I will like you to answer these three questions. I will repeat them. Biochemical changes in hyperglycemia induced microvascular damage. Second is pathophysiology of diabetic retinopathy. And third is epidemiology of diabetic retinopathy. Now coming to classifications of diabetic retinopathy. Background diabetic retinopathy is characterized by microaneurysms, blood hemorrhages, and exudates. They are the earliest signs of diabetic retinopathy and persist as more advanced lesions appear. Second, diabetic maculopathy, which I described, which strictly refers to the presence of any retinopathy at the macula, but is commonly reserved for significant changes, particularly vision-threatening edema and ischemia. Third is pre-proliferative diabetic retinopathy, which manifests as paternal spots, venous changes, intraretinal microvascular anomalies, and deep hemorrhages. Pre-proliferative diabetic retinopathy indicates progressive retinal ischemia with a heightened risk of progression to retinal neovascularization. Then comes the stage of PDR, proliferative diabetic retinopathy. It is characterized by neovascularization or on or within 1 disc diameter of the disc and or new vessels elsewhere. Neovascularization can be on the disc, it can be on the peripheral retina, which is known as NPE. Last is advanced diabetic, where there is fractional detachment, significant vitreous hemorrhage, and neovascular glaucoma. So you must answer this in your long question. Classification of diabetic retinopathy, non-proliferative or background diabetic, that is initial stage, and diabetic maculopathy. You are not supposed to forget maculopathy because that is a separate entity. Then pre-proliferative, then proliferative, and then advanced diabetic itis. And then coming to background diabetic retinopathy, as we have already discussed, fundoscopically background diabetic retinopathy shows microaneurysms, dot and blot hemorrhages, and exudates. Exudates are hard type. You can see in the diagram, they are white or yellow. They are waxy looking patches with well defined, often serrated margins. So my cursor is pointing towards the hard type of exudates. Then you can see deep hemorrhages here and microaneurysms also in the macular area. The same patient's fluorescent angiography is shown here, where leakage of the dye can be seen, and we will discuss the coming to diabetic macular edema. Macular edema occurs in a large number of eyes, as we have already discussed, and there are hard exudates centrally. It is a commonest cause of diminution of diabetic retinopathy. Clinically significant macular edema is a term which is used if it fulfills the following criteria. So, in case of diabetes, if there is macular edema or there are hard exudates which are present within 500 microns of the foveal center, or there is an edema of 1 disc diameter, but this edematous area of more than 1 disc diameter, any part of which lies within 1 disc diameter of the foveal center. So, if any patient fulfills one of these three criteria, edema within 500 microns, hard exudates within 500 microns of foveal center, or edema of more than 1 disc area, any part of which lies within 1 disc diameter of foveal center, then this macular edema is known as clinically significant macular edema. Now, how to confirm this? Vision is one. Second, fluorescent angiography, the macular edema can be classified as focal, where there is focal leakage, diffuse, where there is diffuse leakage, or third is ischemic maculopathy, where there are increase in size of foveal avascular zone and lot of area of the macula undergoes ischemia. So these are the FFA based classification of diabetic macular edema. Now in this diagram you can see the girdle of hard exudates. This is known as succinate retinopathy. So you can see around the macula you can see a girdle like appearance of the hard exudates. These hard exudates, they can get either elliptical form or half circle or in the fan shaped manner or star shape. Depending on that, it is known as macular star or macular fan or succinate retinopathy. Now, clinically, CSM is best recognized by slit lamp using plus 78 or 90 units as a loss of foveal reflection around the macula. The treatment for this is photocoagulation using argon diode or frequency double deaglation. So, fluorescein angiography identifies areas of leakage which are then photocoagulated directly focal or by light intensity pulse in a grid pattern over the posterior pole, avoiding foveal avascular zone. Fluorescent angiography also, it is very important now to understand this. It, fluorescent angiography also helps to diagnose ischemic maculopathy. Now, if you find that there is no leakage, if you find that there is no focal or diffuse leakage, but there is gross ischemia involving the macula, it is very important not to treat such patients by laser photocoagulation because it will worsen, it will not improve the maculopathy. So from this point of view, FFA is very important because even OCT may not diagnose ischemic maculopathy, but fluorescent angiography will be helping you in identifying ischemic maculopathy. Now this is the picture showing OCT investigation done in a macular edema. Left side you can see this is a cystic fluid accumulation in the retina and elevating the retina. This is known as diabetic macular edema. So you can see after treatment there is a resolution of this edema. Now here you can see red part is thickened retina and you can see after treatment the thickness has settled down. Here the fluorescent angiogram of the same patient shows leakage and this leakage is diffuse and it has been treated by grid photocoagulation. So you can see these marks of laser photocoagulation. This form of laser photocoagulation treatment is known as grid and which has settled the macular edema. Succinate retinopathy, as we discussed, it is due to chronic edema and there is it also seen in hypertensive retinopathy also. In a girdle-like manner, there is deposition of the hard exudates and they can be localized and destroyed by photocoagulation. Also for macular edema, intravitreal steroids and anti-VEGF agents can be used for the treatment. This is a picture of succinate retinopathy again. So my question here is pathophysiology of diabetic macular edema. You will answer in detail and then you will answer fluorescent angiography based classification and then OCT based classification of diabetic maculopathy. Also role of VEGF in diabetic retinopathy. Coming to pre-proliferative or severe diabetic retinopathy, ischemic changes superimposed on background produce a pre-proliferative type of diabetic retinopathy. Fundus shows intravascular mass, intraretinal microvascular abnormalities or shunt vessels and evidence of ischemia such as more than 8 to 10 irregular cottonwood spots. Then there is dilatation and irregularities of the veins, attenuation of the arterioles. These changes indicate progression towards more devastating form of proliferative diabetic retinopathy. Treatment is a regular follow-up which has to be done very frequently because there are signs of ischemia already in the form of cottonwood spots and in the form of dilatation of the veins and formation of earmarks. So all these changes are suggestive of impending ischemia which is there getting developed in the retina. So very regular follow-up is required and fluorescent angiography because you may miss clinically the neovascularization and fluorescent angiography may catch it. So fluorescent angiography is done and first sign of new vessels there is a photocoagulation treatment done here. For the PG students here, my question is how will you differentiate microaneurysms from the hemorrhages in FFA and also how will you differentiate earmarks from the new vessels, neovascularization. Then comes proliferative diabetic retinopathy. Now there is neovascularization at the optic nerve head and also neovascularization elsewhere. It appears adjacent to areas of capillary closure and accompanying fibrous tissue leads next. Such fibrovascular tissue may lie flat on the retina. Now there is fibrovascular proliferation. It may lie flat on the retina or attach itself to the posterior vitreous, leading later to vitreous traction and retinal separation and thinning of blood vessels. Now this leads to vitreous hemorrhage in adults. If the process recurs, there is recurrent vitreous hemorrhage This leads to tractional retinal detachment. Now, ideally, PDR is the stage where the laser photocoagulation is done to the ischemic areas. Now, what is the mechanism of photocoagulation? Now, photocoagulation reduces metabolic demand of the retina. How the ischemic areas are literally destroyed by the laser light and they are converted to necrotic areas. Tissue now becomes dead. Now this dead tissue is in the non-seeing area, peripheral retina. So central vision is preserved, and because of the development of necrotic areas or less ischemic dead areas, the demand automatically gets reduced, and this reduces the release of proliferative factor like VEG, and these hypoxic areas into anoxic areas leads to reduced VEGF release, and this leads to reduction of neovascularization, and also it helps in leaking of vascular anomalies into inner scar. So wherever there is leakage why the vessel is going on, it is converted into scar and further leakage is also stopped. So these are the principles of photocoagulation. I will like you to answer in detail the photocoagulation process, different lasers involved in the photocoagulation, the delivery methods of laser like slit lamp, indirect and endoscopic delivery. You will write in details the modes of delivery of the laser, different lasers involved, argon, krypton, diode or the double frequency green react laser, their wavelengths, and also detailed procedure of the photocoagulation with the complications of the procedure. Patients who have neovascularization affecting more than one-third of disc surface, greater than half of a disc diameter of neovascularization elsewhere, or vitreous hemorrhage are believed to be high risk for PDR cases, and they are at potential threat of losing their sight at any time. So this is known as high risk PDR. The definition of high risk PDR I will repeat. The neovascularization more than one-third of the surface, greater than half this diameter neovascularization elsewhere, or vitreous hemorrhage. These are high risk PDR and they immediately need laser treatment on urgent basis. Otherwise, these cases can bleed anytime. Now, the process of PDR, if continued, then you will anytime get patient who have gross reduction of vision because of vitreous loss, vitreous hemorrhage, because of fractional detachment, or because of neovascularization of the glaucoma. So, pan-retinal photocoagulation process you will read in detail and you will answer. Another mode of treatment now is anti-VEGF agents, which is very effective. Bevacizumab, Avastin, or ranibizumab, Lucentis, or recently aflibercept are the recent anti-VEGF agents which are to be injected intravitreally. Then triamcinolone as a deposteroid can be used in macular edema because of diabetes. So my question to the post-graduation itself mainly is the details of anti-VEGF agents, then their mechanism of action, and there are the procedure of intravitreal injection of anti-VEGFs, and then their ocular and systemic side effects. In advanced eye disease, there needs to be additional treatment of vitrectomy. So again, what is the role of vitrectomy in diabetic retinopathy, and what are vitreous substitutes, and what are the complications of vitrectomy? That is the next question, mainly to be answered by PGs in detail, but UGs can also answer this. Just I want basic indications of vitrectomy in diabetic retinopathy, how vitrectomy helps in diabetic retinopathy, and complications of vitrectomy. Again, you can see neovascularization in the extreme left photograph. This is a neovascular front. This is neovascular neovascularization elsewhere. This shows NVI, neovascularization of the iris, and this shows pre-retinal and vitreous image. All these are the pictures showing high risk PDR where vitrectomy is required. NVI and NVG requires again separate treatment, which you will read and let me. This is a chart showing the stages of diabetic retinopathy and their management. So other treatment modalities include education of the patient, diabetic control, control of other risk factors, and systemic treatment, discontinuation of the smoking, and other modifiable factor treatment like anemia. So again, this shows the types with the therapy and indication. So mild non-proliferative maculopathy, severe non-proliferative, proliferative, and advanced diabetic eye disease. So and their treatment modalities and indications.